So let me first welcome you to, this is the first webinar session in a series on engaging students, and this is going to be focused on reaching all learners in large classes. And there'll be two other, and Todd has it on the PowerPoint, and he'll give you a little bit more details, but there'll be another on September 21st at 2 p.m. and then 2 weeks after that on October the 5th at 2 p.m. Dr. Todd Hamrick will be our presenter today. He's a teaching associate professor in the Fundamentals of Engineering program, and I'm pleased to introduce him and have him provide this presentation to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd.
Okay, sorry about the delay and the technical difficulties. We tested this and it didn't work. So it worked great the other day, but maybe that's the problem. Anyway, I'm Dr. Todd Hamrick, and I appreciate you guys coming into to our webinar today. The Teaching and Learning Commons asked me to do something with them, so I thought I would put this together with their help, and John's been great. So today we're going to be talking about strategies for engaging students in the classroom, particularly in large classes. Give you a quick outline of what we're doing here. I have a short presentation, maybe 15 minutes or so. Then we'll have some questions and discussions. There will be a recording of this webinar available to you after the session, probably sometime next week it'll be available. And if you like what you get here, then we also have two more of them planned. There's going to be one 2 weeks from now at the same time on group work, and 2 weeks after that on hands-on learning. Just give you an idea. Everything that we do here isn't going to apply, but hopefully you can pull a couple of interesting nuggets out of it. But what I'd like for you to do, if you would, is post in the chat the class that you're thinking about. If you're in this webinar, you're probably thinking a little bit in terms of one or two particular classes. So if you could take a look at, or if you could put that in there so we can take a look at them and we can consider what you have, then we might be able to try to customize some of the discussion for you a little bit. And there'll be plenty of time for questions towards the end. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post them in the chat. So here's the layout. I'm going to have a short bio on me, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the problem actually is here with dealing with large classes, and then some things about managing expectations, about engaging in the classroom, engaging outside of the classroom, trying to use effective feedback, and how technology can help you out a little bit. So who is this guy? Does he have any idea what he's talking about? Well, I actually graduated from WVU in 1987. I have 2 undergraduate degrees from WVU in mechanical engineering, and I have a BA in German. I worked for more than 20 years in the plastics industry, and I did a lot of different things in the industry, from product development to management to process improvement and working with customers. But I returned to WVU, I think it was 2005, to get my master's and PhD because I really wanted to teach. So I'm now starting my 7th year. So I haven't been doing this a long, long time, but enough to get a bit of experience at it. Primarily, I teach our Engineering 101 and 102 classes. If you're not super familiar with those, 101 is professional skills class. It's a lot of technical report writing, communication, group work, data analysis, data collection, that type of thing. And then the 102 class is primarily MATLAB programming. I've won a couple of teaching awards, Outstanding Teacher for Statler and the WVU Foundation Teaching Award this year. I focus a lot on kinesthetic learning and experiential learning, and my overall sort of philosophy is to teach beyond the book. So that gives you a quick idea of the kinds of things that I like to do. The problem really is that when we get into teaching, what we like to do, the reason we like to teach is that the effective teachers don't teach material, they teach people. And we like to work with people. And whenever you get into such a large class, you end up with a sea of people, and it's an overwhelming number of them. It gets really difficult to engage with them one-on-one, and that's really what we like to do, is engage with students one-on-one or in small groups. But whenever you get really big groups, it's hard to really get to know them because it ends up just being overwhelming. So when we talk about large classes, how large is large? Well, that's going to vary a little bit from one discipline to another, but typically we're talking about class sizes of 50 or more. But that could vary a little bit depending on what you're doing. I typically teach a couple of classes per semester that are 70 or more, and I don't have a TA in the classroom or for grading. And typically, so I'll have a couple of those. I usually teach about 3 classes, so I'll have about 150 students total, with up to about 70 in one class, and around 150 advisees. So I'm typically working with around 250. Some of those are the same people, so 200, 250 people at a given time. So it's a good idea to consider managing your expectations. What is it that you can do? What is it that your students can do? One of the things to recognize is that not everybody is necessarily wants to engage with you as much as you want to engage with them. It would be great to be able to engage with all of your students, but they can't always. All of them don't necessarily have the same expectation that you do. They may or may not want to engage quite as much as you do. And some of those, you're just not going to be able to. And that's the reality of it. Is we really want to be able to reach every single one in our classroom, but the reality is we're not going to do it. Those who really want to, they're going to seek you out, and they're going to try to make opportunities. And so if you're available, if they see you as available, then they're more likely to come and seek you out. It really is a two-way street. So one of the things you can do is to try to set some classroom rules, and this also helps with expectations, to try to reduce some distractions. Tell them you don't want the phones in the room, you don't want the headphones on. I make my students take their headphones off, take the hat off, put the cell phone away, and pay attention. And I try to have things for them to do in class so that they're less likely to get distracted. So when you're in the class, don't just stand there, do something. It is tempting to lecture. It is tempting because you have so many people for them to become an audience and to just kind of lecture and talk to them. But after a while, you're not really talking to them, you're talking at them. So it's much better to think in terms of not just covering the material, because if you find that you're covering material and you're having to spend a lot of time covering material, what you might want to consider is moving some of that out of the classroom and put more of the fundamental learning in the book. So have some required reading that they'll do outside of class. And that might require partially flipping some of the assignments, not necessarily the whole classroom flipping concept, but you can flip some assignments where I expect you to have already read this fundamental material by the time you come in, so that you can take that material and expand on it. Because it's really much harder to teach critical thinking, and we want students to learn critical thinking, but we end up not teaching it very much. It's a little bit like if we were teaching people to nail boards together and saw wood, but we expect them to then expand that into building a house. What we want to do is have them learn the fundamentals outside and teach them the house building in the class, because that's more application of it. And I use a lot of case studies and a lot of real-world examples because I have a lot of industry experience. I bring examples from that, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can bring examples that are case studies or examples from real-world cases. I bring in samples of things. Here's a part that we made, and pass that around, and then tell the story of how that came about. So if we're talking about, for example, product development, I've got a product development scenario. Here's a case study. Here's how we actually did it. Or if I'm talking about project management, here's a project and how it was managed and how we were able to use our project management tools to shorten our overall lead time. So these are the types of things that I like to use in the classroom. You might be able to do something along that lines from your experience. Also, break up the class. If you talk to them for 50 minutes or 75 minutes, you're going to lose them. There's a lot of study on this, and typically attention span is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 minutes. But in reality, in practice, I find that I can hold them for around 20, 25 minutes, up to 30, depending on what we're doing. And after that, I begin to lose them. So I like to think of breaking up my classroom into about 2 activities per class, usually about 25 minutes each, more or less. That's going to vary a little bit. Sometimes it's a little more than 25, sometimes a little less. I'm actually teaching the same class right now, or 102, that second semester programming class. I'm teaching it in both a 3-day-a-week, 3 50-minute sessions, and a 2-day-a-week, 2 75-minute sessions course, and I'm trying to keep the 2 of them on the same pace. And what I'm doing with that class is I've broken it up into 6 25-minute segments. And I'm still getting some practice at it. It's not perfect, but I'm getting there, and it has worked pretty well to keep them on pace with each other by using that technique. So I have a certain amount of lecture because we have to lecture, and I also have a certain amount of activity. Some of it's done in groups, and some of it is done individually. It might be a discussion. It might be working a problem. It might be working a series of problems. Take this one and then build on something else. I'll work an example on the board, work an example, on the screens, and then have the students come out with, what's the next step, and then I'll walk around the room and help them out. And I really encourage them to ask questions, and I encourage them to help each other. I don't have a TA, and I'm only one of me and 70 of you, so help each other out and work with your partners, work with your with other people around you. And it gets a little noisy sometimes, but that's okay. But it really helps them to use what they're learning to be able to apply that. And it really helps them to learn about it, and it breaks up the class a lot better. It also allows you to get short interactions with some small groups of students. So you'll be able to go around and talk to some small groups of students a little bit at a time, where you've got 3 or 4 or 5 students working on a problem. They're stuck on something. You talk to 3 or 4 or 5 students in short bursts around the room. And you're not going to get to everybody, but you can get to some of them that way, and it really does help with that interaction. This is one of the really most useful things that I do with this with engagement. Outside of class, group projects are really good for working outside of class. It helps the students not only interact with you personally, but it helps the students interact with the course and the course material so that they're doing more to it than just some homework problems. Have them work on group projects, or you can have them do group homework. One of the things that we found is that we did some research on academic integrity issues, and one of the things that we found was that if it's a homework assignment, it's a group assignment. They're going to work on it together. And so rather than try to prevent that, we embrace that and said, sure, go ahead and work on it. We'll give you harder problems expecting that you're going to work on it in groups. And one of the things that I've seen other people do, and I'm not doing so much of this myself, is actually assign blocks of homework, and it's supposed to be done with a group, and then you just turn in one assignment that is group work. It's got 10 problems or 100, however many you think is appropriate, and you don't grade them all. You just select a couple, and those are the ones that you grade. The other thing is having some kind of lab or practice session is good. Now, we taught hands-on project-based stuff for years in Engineering 101 with no labs whatsoever. It was a lot of cardboard structures, but it worked out okay. And those things worked pretty well. It gave the students an opportunity to work together and interact with the material. It gives you an opportunity to interact with small groups of them face to face. You may meet with just the team leaders, or you may meet with some of the groups individually, and having that opportunity to talk to them in small groups gives you that engagement, and they see you sort of outside of the classroom. You're not just the sage on the stage. You are also somebody that can answer questions and show them how you can apply the material. It is a little bit time consuming, and sometimes you'll have to be at work at 8, 9 o'clock at night, and that's just the reality of it. But it is really worthwhile, and if you want to engage well with your students, that is what it takes. But it allows them to do a lot more critical thinking. Getting useful feedback. How many times do you say, any questions? Bueller? No, it's crickets. Nobody says anything. They don't raise their hands. But you can do a lot of short, frequent quizzes. They're low stakes, and they give you good feedback. I'm not a fan of pop quizzes, but if you're doing at least one short quiz a week, then that gives you at least some feedback on how the students are doing. It also helps you to keep attendance. I like to do a technique called a minute paper, and it's just a short, hey, what did you learn today in today's class that you didn't know before? Or how can you apply what you learned today to the project that you're doing outside of class? Just one simple question, and they're not going to write the novel in 1 minute, but they can put down an idea. I did this just the other day. We had a guest lecture in from our librarians. They come to visit our class one time every semester, and at the end of it, I had them do that. This is a way to take attendance, who was there, and it's also a way to give us some feedback. What did they get out of that lecture? And then I am able to download that. I'll talk about that in a second. Able to download that, and I sent that off to the librarian that did the lecture to give her that feedback and say, what did they like, and that way she can modify what she does based on the things that they thought were the most useful and interesting. Technology can really help you here also. I don't know if other people use eCampus as much as I do, and I will complain long and loud about eCampus. There are a lot of things I don't like about it, but I use it anyway for all of its bumps and warts. It's still a good tool, and once you kind of learn how to work it, it really can give you some great tools. You can post up your notes, you can post presentations, PowerPoints, anything like that. You can put assignments in there, and nobody ever tells me that they didn't get the assignment, because their assignment is always available to them right on eCampus. You can set it up so that it will auto-grade your quizzes and exams, and you may not want to have every question auto-graded, but you can have some questions auto-graded, and that's how we use it in the freshman engineering department, especially for the bigger exams, midterm and final exams. We'll have part of the exam is auto-graded with things like multiple choice, multiple answer type questions, and then some of the questions are short answer and essay, and then we have to hand grade those, and it's still a lot to hand grade, but I'm not hand grading 150 exams and 50 questions on each one. I'm hand grading a smaller number of them. It also allows you to grade by question. So if question number 7 is an essay question, you can set it up so that all of question number 7 appear on your screen at once, and you can grade everybody's question number 7 all at the same time. It allows you to get data on the questions. So you can get some data to say which questions were the ones that they did really well on, maybe they're too easy, which questions did they really struggle with, maybe they're too hard, and you can even go back and say, you know what, that question wasn't fair. I thought it was clear, but it wasn't. You can have it go back and auto regrade everything. So I don't know if you've used these functions, but they are really great to have It keeps your grade book. And so using eCampus is also is really a good way then to take some of that sort of mechanics of the teaching out, so that you can concentrate more on some of these other things that I talked about earlier that are a little bit time consuming. Discussion boards is another thing that are useful. When I have small groups of students giving presentations and everybody else has to sit there, then they get bored and it's really hard to keep their attention. I use discussion boards then to allow peer feedback, and then they're actually required as part of their grade to provide feedback to the students who are presenting. And that gives them something to do during every presentation, and that helps keep them engaged with that. Some people like clickers. I don't have any experience with them. I'm fortunate enough to teach in a classroom where everybody has a computer. And so clickers are a great way to go if they work for you. I just don't have any experience with them myself. So I'm going to ask you guys to write a minute paper. So if you would, in the chat, write down just one useful idea that you got out of the webinar, and that way we can keep that and we can look at it and see what we can improve for next time. So if you'll write me a minute paper, or maybe a 20-second paper, that'd be great. Just write down kind of the main idea of what you got out of here. As I said earlier, this webinar will be available from Teaching and Learning Commons. You'll be able to get that from them if you want to get recording of it. And also there are additional engagement sessions coming up. So who has questions? Okay, somebody's asking, how do you teach critical thinking? The best way to do something like that is with experience. They just have to experience it. It's not something that you can just, it's hard to create a lesson plan on critical thinking. You really have to, they have to experience it. They have to try it. And the best way for them to do that is with something like a project or something like a group work that they'll work on it together. And very often the answer to the question is not given in the question. So they have to figure out and figure out what they need. The concept of a well-posed question where everything you need is in the question and there's nothing that you don't, not only occurs in college, that doesn't happen anywhere else outside of these walls. So to teach critical thinking, they have to practice it. So that would be the thing that I would say with that is give them a tough nut to crack and make them go and do it, and they won't get it right the first time, and they might even be frustrated. Why didn't you you should teach us this? But that's my idea. Does that help you with that? Somebody likes the minute paper idea? Group homework? Yeah, this is something new. The group homework is kind of a neat idea where they're going to work on it in groups anyway, so you might as well make it a group assignment and then give them hard problems. Yeah, two activities per class. That's good. Thank you. How can you tell if the class is really engaged? If you can see their eyeballs, they're engaged. It's as simple as that. If they're looking at you when you're looking back, then they know that they're at least paying attention. And you also are going to see it in the short quizzes, the stuff that you're getting that sort of frequent feedback. I can tell you in that example I gave with the librarian, one of the answers was, the question was, what did you learn today in the library discussion that you didn't know before? And the answer was, I found out that Mrs. So-and-so works in the library. This is not somebody who's engaged, but that was one out of the 60-some that I got. The rest of them really were. So you can tell by their responses if they are talking about the things that you're talking about, and if they're asking good questions. That's a really good way to tell as well.
Todd, here's a pretty good question about how to encourage students to read the textbook for class.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
It's in the chat. How do you encourage students to read the textbook for class? Basically, how do you make sure that students are prepared when they come into class?
Well, the first time you do it and you say, here's the material I want you to read, and then they come in unprepared, they're going to know they're unprepared because they don't know how to do the activity that you've prepared. They don't know what you're talking about. And it'll take a couple of those sessions of not getting it and not being able to keep up. But especially if you're teaching sophomore or higher level students, they should know that you got to keep up in college or you're not going to be able to do it. So how you get them to do it is you have them read it before, and they need that information before they come in. Now you could, if you really wanted to put a sharper point on it, you could make a small take-home quiz that they have to answer, and that has to be done before they come to class, or they get no credit for that. So it's only a few homework points maybe, but if they haven't done that, then so that would be another way to do it. Is if class is on Monday, then by 11 p.m. Sunday night they have to have completed a short take-home quiz that's based on the reading, and that would be another way that you could do it.
Okay. Todd, Carrie Harbert mentioned that for her, from her experience, group homework turns into 2 students doing the work, learning the material, and then the rest of the students copying those two
Yeah,
students.
you're going to get some of that. Yeah, you could, and for that, you could just make them in pairs. Yeah, you're going to get some of that. The problem with that is the ones who just copy it, they haven't learned the material, and then on the quizzes it shows up, and then on the exams it shows up even worse. The quizzes are good feedback. Give them short, frequent quizzes are good feedback for both you and for the student. It tells you what they're getting, and it also tells them what they're getting and what they're not. And if they copied the homework, oh good, I got that. But it's hardly worth any points. At least in our classes, the homework is worth very little actual credit, barely enough to make it worth their while. All homework together is worth 5 or 10% of the course. It tends to be a small percentage of the whole course. So it's worth doing, but if they cheat on it, it's not going to help them so much that they're going to be able to squeak by. Because if they cheat on it, and they've just copied it from other people, then when they go into the quizzes, they won't do well. And they either wake up from that or else they fail in the exams. And that's how you keep them honest on it. And you are going to get a few who are going to do it. They just are. I had one last semester that he got 100% on every homework, but could not do a single problem in class. And he ended up not passing class.
Lucinda Potter has she mentioned about students, group members giving each other a participation grade. Have you ever tried anything like that?
We actually do that, yes. We do participation grades now. It is worth 10% of their project. So in one project, it's worth 1% of their course grade, and in the other project, it's worth about 2% of their total course grade. So overall, about 3% of their total course grade is participation with each other. So yes, we've done participation grades, and to encourage them to do that, if you don't rate your other team members, you get 0 on that. So that tends to encourage them to do that. Yes, we've used participation grades, and knowing that they are going to be judged that way has a tendency to keep them better engaged, especially those sort of marginal ones. The ones who don't do anything, they're pretty easy. You can kick them out of the group. Nobody really feels sorry for them. It's the ones that show up part of the time and they do some of the work, and then you feel sorry for them, and they always have a good excuse. Those are the sort of marginal ones. And students, it's much easier for students to just say, well, it's easier just to give them the grade and let them slide. And so if they have those kind of peer reviews that are anonymous. That does give you at least some opportunity to dock the grades of the ones that didn't participate.
Great. Okay, we have Renice Gray asked, what is the best way to present material in a large classroom? Do you typically use videos, lectures, PowerPoint, or a mixture of these?
Well, that's kind of a personal preference question. They get beat over the head with PowerPoints. Sometimes entire courses are taught on nothing but PowerPoints, and it can be brutal. So I think a mixture of stuff is better. I make a commitment to my students that if I open a PowerPoint, that it will not last more than 20 minutes. I keep them short, and then I do something else. So that way, I've got a mixture of stuff. Some PowerPoints, sometimes chalk and talk. Sometimes I have them working the problems. I do a lot of MATLAB, so it's a lot of follow me kind of stuff. I type it up and then have them type it up. And then and even when I'm doing that, every 10, 15 minutes, I'll stop and I'll walk around the class to make sure that everybody's keeping up, especially when I kind of come to a stopping point. You have to get this before you're going to get the next point. So I'll walk around the class and make sure everybody's getting it. So I think a mixture of stuff is really a good way to do it. Because if you do all one thing, all one thing tends to get boring. So I really like steak, but I wouldn't want it every day. So.
Okay, Todd, another question. When you have a mix of levels of students, from freshmen to seniors, would you encourage critical thinking activities to be done in groups or individually?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with that. We teach mostly freshmen and some sophomores mixed in. So what was the question with if you've got a mix of them and you want to teach critical thinking?
Right. Is it best done in group work or individual work?
Critical thinking is almost always better in groups because you bounce ideas off of each other. But if you have people at that level, I mean, they're only they're only maybe 3 years age apart, but that's a massive difference in age between an 18-year-old freshman just was in high school a few months ago, and this hardened senior that is a veteran of so many classes. They would have a tendency to sort of do everything. So that's a tough one. I would be interested in trying to work on that a little bit. But generally speaking, I would say that group work would almost always be better. But what you would need to do is try to put something in place that would keep the seniors from just telling the freshmen what to do and answering it for them. I would maybe try to give them something that none of them have seen before to level that playing field a little bit.
So with that, Todd, would you think that a mix of students from different levels would be better, or would you separate like seniors and freshmen in terms of when you develop the groups?
I don't have much experience with that, so it's hard for me to say what would be better. There are pros and cons to both ways of doing it. Segregating them by level has the advantage of each group being on sort of its own level. You would then, of course, have to require a higher level of thinking from the higher level students. But there's some advantage in having people of different levels, so long as the expectations are set correctly. I do have so I have a little bit of experience with this. One of the things that I do, you can see on the wall behind me, is study abroad, and in those, I do have a mix of students, and I sometimes have wet behind the ears freshmen, and I have hardened veterans and everybody in between. And the older students do have the opportunity to provide leadership in this. So one approach that I might try would be to ask the the older students, because I do this actually, is to ask the older students not to answer the questions, but to provide leadership. They can kind of become your TAs. They become your team leaders in each of the groups, but specifically call them aside and ask them not to answer the questions for them, but to help you, to help the younger ones to understand and to become more facilitators of the problem. And they will learn something from that as well. So, and I have had some experience with doing exactly that on these study abroads, and the older ones do then provide leadership for the younger ones. But it's a little bit of a different scenario than a typical classroom. So, there is some applicability. So that would be something to try. I don't know if it would work, but certainly you could try it to set your older students up as team leaders and then ask them to be more facilitators than answerers.
Yeah, nice idea. They may need some guidance with, what that means, how they're,
Sure.
To be leaders. But yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea.
It is, but you know what? They're the older ones now, and that's kind of what it's going to take.
Yep, absolutely. And you're giving them some, we talk about lifelong skills. That definitely is one. Let's see. We'll take one last question. How do you make yourself available outside of class? Longer office hours? Other ways?
I have 16 office hours this semester. 16.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Now, all of those are not, I'm absolutely strapped to my desk office hours. About 6 of those, either 4 to 6 of those are I'm strapped to my desk office hours. The other 10 to 12 are I'm usually in my office type of office hours. So I have a lot of office hours, and we also hold labs, and I'm here sometimes in the evenings helping students out, especially whenever they have a big assignment due. I will be in a day or two before if they've got a big project that they're building stuff, I'll be in a day or two before to give them some guidance on how to do that. So you sometimes have to come in. So yes, it does require sometimes some additional hours, but that's kind of the nature of the job to a great extent. This is not a 9-to-5 job.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate everyone being patient with our technical difficulties in the beginning and for attending. I would ask that you keep an eye out on the TL Commons event page for the subsequent session. As Todd mentioned at the beginning, the second one will take place on September 21st, and then the third one on October the 5th, same time, and we'll share the webinar link with you via that page. So thanks again, and hopefully you found some value in what was presented.